This program is rated PG. It contains themes and scenes which may not be suitable for very young audiences. Parental guidance is advised.
Be advised that the views and opinions of the hosts and guests do not reflect those of the station.
Good evening to another episode of Philippines Uncut. I am Chris Ablan. I'll be your guest host, subbing in for Buddy Cunanan. Our topic for this evening is post-Yolanda reconstruction, specifically for disaster areas planning. Tonight's guest needs no introduction. He is known world over. Prominent architect and urban planner for the past 40 years. Let's all welcome Architect Jun Palafox. Sir, good evening.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me here, Chris. Glad to be here, and good evening to the televiewers.
All right, so tonight's topic is on the disaster areas stricken by Typhoon Yolanda. We're now close to 100 days after the typhoon, and 100 days, and where do we see urban planning with regards to the disaster-stricken areas?
Yeah, the disaster is a crisis, and the crisis created an opportunity to do things right.
Right.
And building back better, smarter, safer, and sustainable. And the opportunity is there. And but we have to do it properly. Post-disaster assessment is being done now by scientists, hazard mapping, and so on. So that will be an input to the planning.
So there's replanning now. Are we going to assume that there was wrong planning before, or it was just not updated? What are your thoughts on that, Architect?
Yeah, many of our planning practices, zoning, building codes are obsolete.
Right.
So it's opportunity now to update them.
Right.
And like for instance, the waterfront.
Yes.
And we have hazard maps that
Yes.
they are liable to flooding, vulnerable to tsunami and storm surge. But we did the mitigation measures was not there, like mangroves and seawalls, and also there was no adaptive architecture engineering. So like other areas in the world that gets flooded often, their houses are elevated, or the buildings.
Right.
So there should not be any habitable areas, habitable rooms or floors below the flood line.
Right.
And I was told also the forecasts were not accurate.
Right.
Like 4 meters of flooding, I was told it was as high as 8 meters.
Right.
And also the building code, I think in Tacloban, the building code required only 220 kilometers per hour of wind speed.
Right.
And super typhoon was 320 kilometers per hour.
Yes.
And there was also substandard construction materials, mode of construction. And 3 times I've been there, and I've been observing the shape of the buildings and so on. Like the circular shape seems to be stronger. And the dos aguas, those 2 sloping roof, they were all blown away.
Yes.
And the cuatro aguas, the 4 sloping roof, I
Yes.
think they survived 30%, my guesstimate. But the cemetery, the mausoleums, they all survived.
Right.
Concrete roof, concrete walls.
Right.
And we as architects, engineers, planners, together with the engineers, I think it's time now to really restudy the designing with nature, designing with cyclones and super typhoons in mind, so we don't repeat the same inadequate design.
But this doesn't only apply to Visayas. It has to be applied all over communities, cities, and municipalities that share the same plan like Tacloban.
It should be. The Philippines has the 3rd longest coastline in the world.
Yes, yes.
In fact, it's longer than that of mainland USA. And most of our towns and cities are along the coast. Because the evolution of cities, they started with port-driven, near the waterfront, port. And then railway-driven, so it went higher. Then highway-driven.
Right.
This century will be airport-driven cities,
Right.
aerotropolis. But other older cities in the world, they were able to update their infrastructure
Right.
floodgates and mitigation measures like seawalls and mangroves.
Right.
Mangroves, I may talk about it because I help also in the reconstruction work after the Indian Ocean tsunami.
Right.
And we did some work on planning and architecture for Sri Lanka and Indonesia.
Right.
And Maldives Island, it was not as damaged as the others because they have so much mangroves,
Right.
and their houses and resorts are on stilts,
Right.
just like our silong in our ancestral houses.
Right.
So the mangroves reduce the height of the tsunami.
Right.
And elsewhere in the world, in many places, they really address it, whether man-made infrastructure or natural.
So is that what you advocate to local officials nationwide? Is at least if you're living in the coast, you work on your mangroves
Yeah, mangroves.
because
and
they do deter
Yeah.
tidal waves or tsunamis.
they reduce the
They
height.
mitigate.
Mitigate. So this is mitigation. The other one is adaptation.
Right.
So we adapt your architecture. Let's say if your area is liable to flooding, get the highest flood line. Like we've done some buildings in Cagayan de Oro near the river. I raised the whole hotel, convention, and condominiums by
Yes.
11 meters high.
Yes.
Below 11 meters, no habitable rooms. Because I was told the last flooding was 5.5 meters.
Right.
And while under construction, there was another flood, 8.4 meters. So we were safe 11 meters. And the buildings under construction were able to save 700 human lives, 2 cows and 3 piglets because they climbed. And the Marikina river banks were also 21 meters elevated because the 100-year flooding history is about 19 meters.
So as an urban planner, you suggest to adapt to climate change. When I went to Tacloban last December, I understand you were there also 3 times already. A lot of, I mentioned this to you earlier, a lot of the local government buildings were located near the seashore. The courts were near the seashore, the city hall was near the seashore, and school and UP Tacloban is near the seashore.
Yeah.
Right after Tacloban, suddenly local leaders have been thinking of moving these buildings to north of Tacloban or somewhere else.
Yeah.
And would you think that's a good idea, or would you rather have them adapt to climate change and rebuild using the flood lines as a starting point?
Adaptation is more expensive, and if the government can look at maybe on a higher ground, so you can have a new Tacloban, new Palo, on a higher ground, maybe build them above 10 meters, put your highways there and new townships higher than the flood lines. And there will be some historical and cultural significance of the old town.
Yes.
So maybe selectively you allow buildings by adaptation. And in Aceh, Indonesia, the government did not confiscate the areas that are liable to flooding.
Okay.
So what they did, the homeowners, landowners, building owners, they retained ownership of the area that got flooded, and they were given new land in the higher ground.
Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe the national government can do that also.
Can do that also because the concern of the Indonesians was maybe the next administration might sell those lots to other developers, and we can learn a lot more from Indonesia and Sri Lanka and so on, that you can really build back better. And even, we call them transient homes. We don't call them temporary bunk houses. Transient homes should not be treated like a consumable. It's an asset. That's why I'm glad the government listened. No more bunk houses. Because
Right.
I commented they were undersized and substandard.
Right.
When friends in the media asked me, based on my international experience, how did I feel about them? So I told them they were undersized and substandard. Because even for the victims or survivors of the calamity, they are entitled to at least 3.5 square meters per person
Right.
for transient homes. Permanent homes, 7 square meters per person.
All right.
And the bunk houses, I was told, was only 8 square meters per bunk house for a family of 5.
Right.
And when you do transient homes, human dignity is very important.
Yes.
Because the victims, they lost everything already.
Yes.
The least you could give them is dignity.
Yes.
And it should also be gender sensitive.
Yes.
You don't design that the daughters sleep with their brothers and fathers.
Yes.
And that's why what we did elsewhere in the world is around 22 square meters
Right.
minimum, so that at least the young girls who are the worst victims of disasters are women and children,
Yes.
especially young girls. Then the principle of the house would grow as the income grows, the house would grow as the family grows.
Yes.
With a kitchen garden,
Yes.
at least they can have some vegetable gardens behind their plots, and that's the least we could do. And I'm glad government has listened.
Yes.
They increase the sizes of the bank houses. And as of yesterday, I think no more. They will just give materials. But we should building materials. We should follow a set of standards. Like you mentioned, the Spear Handbook.
Yes.
And even some of our decision makers in government, first time they heard about this international standard in January 7, after I spoke out
Yes.
January 6th. And maybe even some foreign donors have thanked me for speaking out, because these foreigners, protocol, they cannot criticize the host
Yes.
country. So they thanked me for bringing it up, and for the benefit of the victims. And I'm glad that people listen.
Well, we have you to thank for that, and we hope you continue to observe the reconstruction and the re-urban planning of disaster-stricken areas. And let me go into that. How is your relationship now with government with regard to the replanning of the different townships and the municipalities?
Yeah. Several international agencies like Chuchi,
Yes.
they have asked my help, and some foundations of big conglomerates, they have asked our help. Some mayors, they called me up also for help. Of course, they are financially challenged right now,
Yes.
and we're helping. Master planning communities better, safer, smarter, and also the buildings. We're looking at it like 1974, there was a super typhoon in Guam.
Okay.
So they changed their building code and their construction methods. And I'm told the ones who helped them were Filipino architects, engineers, and contractors.
Wow.
So, and people like me have done work in 38 countries,
Mhm.
and I was able to help other countries. So it's about time we help our country.
Yes.
And I call that patriotic architecture or urban planning for humanity. And for Secretary Ping Lacson, I was honored when he asked me to join him before he decided to accept the job.
Uh-huh.
So we talk about some guiding principles like no corruption.
No corruption.
Everything must be done with transparency, accountability, and good governance.
Okay.
Number two, no band-aid solutions. As much as possible, all whether immediate action, short-term, medium-term, or long-term, must be as much practicable disaster resilient.
If it's okay, architect, what are the usual band-aid solutions used by local governments? Because this is not the first time that we've been stricken by a very hard typhoon. So, from your experience, what did you notice that local government or local leaders have been doing that is wrong? What are the band-aid solutions?
Both local and national, like the bunk houses.
The bunk
The
houses.
same mistake of the roof,
Right.
almost flat, and they were all blown away. Then I was told the specifications for the bunk houses was marine plywood. They
Right.
used ordinary plywood, 1/4 inch. And basically the size was a mistake. It doesn't give human dignity to the families, especially young girls. And even the location, I'm told they are not disaster resilient. And these are, again, I think band-aid solutions. But these were decided on before the Presidential Assistance for Reconstruction and Rehabilitation came into the picture.
Yes.
And I think we should now change our attitude. Pwede na is not good enough. Like in my office, if better is doable, good is not good enough.
Yes.
So this is an opportunity to do things better. And the rest of the world is watching us.
Yes.
Because just like the first interview I had after Yolanda was BBC of London.
Mhm.
And I put forward that maybe we can make Tacloban as a global center for climate change.
Mhm.
Because it's probably the first city worst hit because of climate change.
In recorded history, I think.
Yeah, and just like Hiroshima, Japan, the worst devastated city after World War II,
Mhm.
it was declared as a global center for peace against atomic bombs. And maybe like Warsaw, Poland, the second worst devastated city. And both Hiroshima, Japan, and Warsaw, they're two of the most livable cities in the world now. So we can learn from them. And there are a lot of lessons, because even many Filipino professionals, architects, engineers, scientists, they were involved, like me, in other replanning, remaking, and reconstructing, building back better disaster areas. Even the several organizations I belong to. I'm also a member of the American Institute of Architects, the American Planning Association, Urban Land Institute, all based in the U.S. And we have case studies on lessons learned from Cyclone Katrina, Cyclone Sandy.
Yes.
So on the shoreline, they're now building houses on stilts.
Right.
Let's say if the flood line was this high, the floors of the houses are above it, similar to our ancestral homes
Right.
there. And also, it was found out also, it's not just substandard, not just sizes, but also building materials. The Institute of Steel and Metal Industry or something, they came to my office. They say many of the steel and metal being used in the Philippines are substandard because of smuggling.
Okay.
So they were not certified to be safe, and yet we're using them.
Right.
And I think there's more awareness now. And you can retrofit, like Metro Manila, if happens in Metro Manila, are our buildings ready? And a JICA report 2004 said that 2% of tall buildings were collapsed. I think 30 to 40% of low-rise, medium-rise buildings were collapsed.
Wow.
15% of government buildings were collapsed. 7 bridges were collapsed. 35,000 people will be killed because of the earthquake. And another 18,000, if I remember it right, because of the fire that will ensue. And that was 10 years ago.
Yes.
Are we preparing for that? So we should not limit it only to the super typhoon Yolanda. If that happens in mega cities like Metro Manila, what will be the impact? Are we ready? And I think I put forward more than 100 recommendations already to government.
Okay.
How to address the hazards before they become disasters
Yes.
through urban planning, architecture, and engineering, and the sciences. And we know many of us, architects, planners, engineers, and our local scientists, we know the problem. But unfortunately, I think urban planning in this country is trivialized. So we are second-class citizens. Like, if I may, like your legal profession, you're better recognized than urban planners. It's only during disasters that I get interviews like this. There are 18 kinds of hazards. 10 man-made hazards like terrorism,
Yes.
oil spills, and natural hazards like earthquakes, flooding, landslides. So through proper urban planning, architecture, engineering, and the sciences like geology, volcanology, and all of that, we can all come together and address the hazards before they become disasters. In fact, the Disaster Risk Management Office, it's so reactive. So
Our NDRRMC.
yeah, it should address the hazard before they become disaster. They already assume that there's a disaster because we did not address the hazard.
Right.
So it should be more preventive, proactive rather than reactive.
Yes. By any chance, are you a consultant or member of the NDRRMC?
No, but I've been sending all these recommendations. Under the previous administration, I gave 60 recommendations, and under Pinoy, I think I gave already 100 recommendations because the president said, "Kayo ang boss ko."
Right.
So whether it's acknowledged or not, I keep sending.
Right.
Yeah, because I was able to help other countries, so it's about time to help our country.
Right.
And there seems to be more awareness now, thanks to the media, because programs like this, you may not be aware of it, but we might be saving lives and infrastructure and properties in the future
Yes.
to those who are listening now.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm actually concerned. My mind stuck when you said that one of the problems or on the substandard steel
Yeah.
that we use.
Because of smuggling.
As a homeowner, how am I supposed to know if the steel being used to construct my house or reconstruct my house is substandard or smuggled or not?
Yeah,
Do I just trust my contractor or my architect or
Yeah.
my engineer?
maybe the best is get a structural audit, structural engineer and architectural, and if the contractor followed the specifications. And it really worries us because the industry of steel and metals, they told us about 30% are substandard because of smuggling. Because if you smuggle it, the certification body doesn't go to Department of Trade anymore
Yes.
to certify them.
Yes.
So it seems smuggling really is affecting everybody. Of course, it's not. Let's talk about the elephant in the room: corruption.
Yes.
Corruption kills. And many of the buildings built by government, you could see the steel bars and 160 kilometers per hour. And that's why in my recommendation, the structural audit of all buildings and infrastructure should start with government buildings.
Right.
But there are even private buildings now, like I think Meralco building, they did a retrofit already.
Ah, okay. They
Yeah.
discovered that the
No,
steel that they used.
No, they asked from consultants to make sure,
Ah, okay.
just to make sure. It doesn't really mean that it was substandard, but to make sure. Because even our building code, as I said, many provisions of it is obsolete already.
Right.
Like I've done work in China and 37 other countries. 22 years ago, our building code was better than China.
Right.
Now China is better than us because they are faster in reforms and updating. Unfortunately, in our part of the world, we're very slow in reforms.
Right. You mentioned that you did submit a lot of recommendations to the previous administration and more recommendations with the present administration. Perhaps the addressee the better addressee would be the legislature. Have you submitted your recommendations to Congress, both in the Senate and in the House of
I
Representatives?
think they got it because they got published also. So I sent it to Spalafox Associates. I sent it when I was president of the Management Association of the Philippines. I sent it again as president of the Philippine Institute of Environmental Planners. And it's been published in some papers. And many of our friends in the media, they ask for a copy. So I can email you also.
Right.
So but some of the recommendations were followed, like hazard mapping, flood mapping. I pushed for that in the previous administration. So Project NOAA, it's good they're doing it. The field books now are fault finding, looking for all the fault lines. So at least there's more awareness now.
I guess, at least, we're taking some baby steps.
Yes.
But I think you still have to push government, push private sector to really, embrace the recommendations because, the way it's going, we're not going to see any stoppage of typhoons and other calamities coming. I mean, 2013, we've got so many rains, earthquake in Bohol, and then who knows what 2014 has in store for us.
Yeah, we can borrow from the Joint Foreign Chambers of Commerce. We have this project, Arrancada.
Okay.
Double time. And we have been sending recommendations also to the government.
Right.
Like, I'm not American, but I chair the Environment and Urban Development Committee of the American Chamber of Commerce.
Right.
And I'm not Canadian. I'm a governor of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce. I'm not German. I'm a co-founder of the German Chamber of Commerce. So even these foreign chambers, we've been sending recommendations. And we call it Arrancada. We need to work double time. Another one is government doesn't seem to have institutional memory. When there's new administration, they seem to forget or don't follow the plans of the previous one. So we from the private sector, I think we should be more active now.
Yes.
We should have more continuity.
Yes.
Like if you want to be excellent or honest citizen, you should also demand honesty and excellence from our public servants. It's not enough that you are honest and striving excellence. So we should demand from our leaders honesty and excellence also.
Yes, we need more people like you in the private sector to remind government of their obligations and their commitments in the previous, because government leaders are transients. They change after administration and they do forget. And so they really should be reminded by the private sector of the commitments that they made in previous administrations.
Just like this, with Secretary Lacson, he is depending so much now on the private sector. So he got development sponsors.
All right. Before we get into that, Architect Palafox, we need to pause for a break, and so we'll be right back here in Philippines Uncut.
This program is rated PG. It contains themes and scenes which may not be suitable for very young audiences. Parental guidance is advised.
Be advised that the views and opinions of the hosts and guests do not reflect those of the station.
Good evening to another episode of Philippines Uncut. I am Chris Ablan. I'll be your guest host, subbing in for Buddy Cunanan. Our topic for this evening is post-Yolanda reconstruction, specifically for disaster areas planning. Tonight's guest needs no introduction. He is known world over. Prominent architect and urban planner for the past 40 years. Let's all welcome Architect Jun Palafox. Sir, good evening.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me here, Chris. Glad to be here, and good evening to the televiewers.
All right, so tonight's topic is on the disaster areas stricken by Typhoon Yolanda. We're now close to 100 days after the typhoon, and 100 days, and where do we see urban planning with regards to the disaster-stricken areas?
Yeah, the disaster is a crisis, and the crisis created an opportunity to do things right.
Right.
And building back better, smarter, safer, and sustainable. And the opportunity is there. And but we have to do it properly. Post-disaster assessment is being done now by scientists, hazard mapping, and so on. So that will be an input to the planning.
So there's replanning now. Are we going to assume that there was wrong planning before, or it was just not updated? What are your thoughts on that, Architect?
Yeah, many of our planning practices, zoning, building codes are obsolete.
Right.
So it's opportunity now to update them.
Right.
And like for instance, the waterfront.
Yes.
And we have hazard maps that
Yes.
they are liable to flooding, vulnerable to tsunami and storm surge. But the mitigation measures were not there, like mangroves and seawalls, and also there was no adaptive architecture engineering. So like other areas in the world that gets flooded often, their houses are elevated, or the buildings.
Right.
So there should not be any habitable areas, habitable rooms or floors below the flood line.
Right.
And I was told also the forecasts were not accurate.
Right.
Like 4 meters